Hey everyone, welcome back to Oasis Zoo. Today I'm finally getting outside of my comfort zone with a new build for the African penguin. And honestly, there was a lot of back and forth. I actually built it and then tore it all down, rebuilt it, and we ended up with this final iteration. As we're finally dealing with an animal that dives in water, I started off with some pretty drastic terraforming. Initially, the goal was to make a slightly unique water feature that would allow our penguins to explore to their heart's content. I did find that it was a good idea to use like a 4-meter wall to kind of ensure that the penguins had enough space to dive. And once completing the majority of the terraforming work, it was time to begin creating the actual underwater area. I did return to our concrete panels to help create the shape of the basin, and this new basin helps to kind of give a clean look to this portion of the habitat, while at the same time hiding all the terraformed terrain. Once I had a rough form of the basin in place, it was time really to start to move on to the underwater observation point. Now, the idea behind the building is really just to give a guest an underwater viewpoint. Now, you saw me use a little pink plastic piece, and really I felt that it was roughly the same size as our guests, which kind of helped to provide a little bit of a better perspective for me to work with. Now, having kind of got that set up with some pathing, it was really time to work on this pretty unique feature, which is really just a pumping station. Now, we're dealing with a ton of water. Pun really intended on that joke, and this would make sense that we would have a filtering station here. It helps to keep the water clean and safe to use. Coincidentally, one of our Discord members, Claby, actually had a fantastic idea of using the pumping station to also support a washroom for the guests. Now, in an ideal world, we would utilize the same pumping stations to kind of feed this washroom, and it doubles as a way to conserve even more water in the desert. It's a nice little kind of figure for the theme of the overall build. Now, I also added in these small curbs at the base of the pumping station to act as intake vents for the water area, and I just took the opportunity to kind of clean up our viewing window just a little bit more. It's slowly taking shape for what we want to see. Now, seeing as we're working with the African penguin and preparing for this build, I really wanted to kind of pull up some interesting facts and do a little bit of research. I actually only found out that they can only be found on the southwestern coast of Africa, ranging from Namibia to South Africa. And they typically live in large breeding colonies, mostly found on rocky islands or coastal mainland areas. And often these colonies can actually reach thousands of penguins. Thankfully, we don't really have to deal with that many in our exhibit. And despite what I initially thought, African penguins aren't actually nest builders. Instead, they create these burrows or find natural crevices in the rocks to kind of lay their eggs and raise their chicks. Sadly, the African penguin is actually considered endangered, and this means that they fit right in with Oasis Zoo, unfortunately. Hopefully, this new home will fit their needs and allow us to participate in some additional conservation efforts. Now, returning back to our observation house, I initially went with a lighter color for the walls of the building. In hindsight, I really didn't like the way this looked, so I ended up changing direction. And part of the inspiration for this build was actually McDonald's that had recently opened up near me. I've noticed recently that their new buildings actually have this really nice contrast between brick, wood, and metal. And I tried to emulate this here by dedicating at least one corner to the metal and the rest to a darker wood grain. This actually helped to give it a nice contrast that eventually really worked out with our faux brick features. It's kind of funny considering, we can take inspiration from so many weird things in buildings. It's a nice little aspect of, building within Planet Zoo. Now, as I built out the walls, I actually ended up creating some empty spaces, and honestly, this worked in my favor. In reality, these spaces would normally house a lot of the filtration and electrical systems for the building, so it actually had an added benefit based in reality. We can also finally see that viewing window take shape. Again, I went through a few iterations before landing on this wider viewport, and that makes sense. As it's holding so much water back, it would normally need to be reinforced with pretty thick glass to keep that water at bay. Although, that being said, we actually do go back and change this entire area once again later in the video. Initially, I also used the timber beams to border the viewing area, but after a lot of trial and error, it really didn't stay for too long. Now, I also wanted to give this habitat a unique feature, so I actually worked a waterfall into the building. Now, this waterfall would also be fed by the same water filtration system behind the walls. I also initially placed a piece of glass in our viewing area, but I eventually returned and removed it. It didn't quite fit with the overall feel, plus I needed to place a glass barrier here, so it actually worked out. And with all of that finally staged, it was really time for us to start working on our roof of our building. Now, for the roof, I looked through quite a few options, built quite a few roofs before deciding to go with a black plastic roof. And honestly, this turned out really nice. I also added a second story to the building. Now, this would normally be used by staff to get a better view of the exhibit and to help monitor our penguins. As part of Conservation Canada's core imperatives, we're committed to breeding programs. And this bird's eye view would allow keepers to monitor the habitat with as little engagement or influence as possible. Now, being honest here, I think I've just found my favorite new way to build roofs in Planet Zoo. So I decided, why not? I'll extend it out over to the water filtration towers as well. Now, because of the differing shapes of the buildings and because they're so close to each other, this actually worked out to give it a really unique feel. Once completed, I built up the framework for the outdoor portion of the habitat and everything started to come together. Finally, it was time to work on the rocks. Now, as a water-based exhibit, I felt that the faux rocks would fit nicely here. I did set on a color initially, and that actually makes it easier because it also means that everything's going to be a consistent color across the board. Now, I did border the side of the buildings to help blend in the corners and cover the holes from the terraforming. It's just something that we have to deal with. I did extend it and kind of marry it a little bit with the water filtration towers as well. Now, returning back to that underwater window, I did use the larger faux rocks to mask a lot of the concrete panel. And this is kind of where we start to see the timber frame that we had just built start to disappear. And while we salvage it a little bit, it does get worse later in the video. I also placed some rocks around the edge of the building as well. This helped to cover up the rocks that were sticking through from the exterior. And truthfully, because we're underwater, this actually symbolizes the idea that we're underground, and faux rocks are perfect for that. Now, we did utilize more faux rocks to cover up the concrete for the bathroom as well, and just start to kind of pull everything together. I'm also falling in love with these faux rock clusters. Mixing the large and the small together, blend in the rocks and removes a lot of those sharp edges. It also has the added benefit of giving the area a more watery feel. And really, that's what we want to obtain. I would like to think this area would be quite cool and build up a lot of moisture, and the faux rocks kind of extend the life of the area. We also worked on our waterfall a bit more, dug out an area for the water to pool, and then added in some rock clusters to fill it in. Admittedly, you can't see the water pooling, so I ended up utilizing some of those water features to symbolize water kind of pooling up there as well. I ended up using quite a bit of the faux rocks around the waterfall to blend everything in and disguise the entrance just a little bit more. Overall, it actually looked really nice. Next, it was time to work on the upper building a little bit more. And this meant creating more custom fencing using all new materials this time. I actually used the metal beams, and I just want to give a quick thank you to Sparrow838 for the awesome tip to give it a bit of a different feel. Now, knowing that, we do end up changing the colors, but I found that there was a large hole on the metal beams that was very hard to cover. I had the idea of utilizing these poles to kind of fill everything in, but in hindsight, my concern is that those poles are going to stick below the roof and I won't be able to mask them that well. Instead, I ended up utilizing the timber pieces to give that sense of a fence top, and you really see these on a lot of fences in Canada anyway. And they actually came out quite well. Once dyeing it black, it had that really clean look and it actually matched really well with the roof. Once completed, I ended up bordering the entire roof with this fence, and it actually fit really well with the idea that staff were going to come up here to utilize this area to monitor and review the penguin exhibit. To help give this a little bit more realism, I added a door and a few windows that are actually going to light up at night to give that little bit of a brighter view to the overall build. Once that was all completed, it was time for us to work on the above ground viewing area. To help merge the concrete with the pathing that we're going to place shortly, I used some plaster bricks to act as a lip. This would also help to ensure any splashed water wouldn't run into the sand, creating mud, keeping both our guests and penguins happy. Now, the really cool thing about using these plastic pieces as a lip is due to the terraforming, your path can't get too close. This actually helps to extend your path a little bit closer to the concrete, giving it a more natural overall feel. I also put together our second new fence of the day, using more of those metal beams and a plane of glass, giving it a more sleek, modern look. Now, I'm finding that this entire build is actually taking on that modern look overall, but I'm not going to complain. Now, once we decided and landed on our colors, we utilized those timber pieces again, which I'm quickly finding a new love for as well. It's amazing what you can find when you start to play this game more often. And then I border the entire area. Now, quick tip from my end, I find that it's actually a lot easier, and it took me this long to figure this out, to pull the one post off. This allows us to give a little bit more freedom when it comes to placing everything. I was also today years old when I realized you did not need to click the check mark to kind of finish everything. Can't believe it took me this long to figure that out. Now, returning back to our observation house for what I really hope is the last time, really wanted to finish this off. I used some faux trees to act as pillars. Now, I can't take credit for this. This is actually, again, another tip from Sparrow838. I was watching one of her videos and I saw her do this, and they looked absolutely amazing. So I utilized a larger piece to act as a keystone, and it kind of created this fun little entrance for our guests. And again, it hit a lot of those sharp edges. I also went back to covering up the washroom. We had a concrete wall. It didn't look that great. It didn't fit with the theme. So really wanted to utilize even more faux rocks to give it a little bit more of a natural look and have it blend in with the rest of the building. Fortunately, there isn't a piece small enough in the faux rock category that would have allowed us to kind of cover this central pillar. So instead, I utilized some of these flat rocks and I kind of just rotated them around, giving it a little bit more of a more natural look, and got rid of those tiles. Finally, I modified our viewport for the last time. I felt that it was a little too small, so I ended up increasing it and adding in some fences as added precaution. I also had this fun little idea to use the large faux rocks to mask some benches. This would allow our guests to essentially sit on this rock wall and give it a more of a unique feel. I remember going to a lot of zoos and finding these natural benches that I would love to sit on, and this kind of fit with that theme, and I really liked the way it kind of turned out. I really do hope that the guests get to sit there. We added some king penguin posters. Now, I know we're dealing with African penguins, but no poster exists for them. So I felt that this was the best deal that I could come up with. I also added our welcome sign, and I decided to call this exhibit Waddle Bay. I think Waddle Bay fits the theme of penguins so much. If there's one thing you're gonna know about penguins, they're gonna waddle everywhere. So I love the idea. I also added in some shelving for the penguin posters that we placed, and the idea behind it is it just means that they're kind of just resting there, walking across this flat shelf. I also decided to add some lighting because I can't forget we got to support our nighttime guests, and I utilized our aquatic lighting system. It actually made it feel even better. I also added an education board. Unfortunately, they don't have anything to do with water specifically, but I found our climate change actually works really well. I also placed down our final education board for this observation point, and I wanted to kind of give it a little bit more of a unique feel, so I ended up utilizing these twilight door planks to make it seem more at home and fit with the theme overall. This did mean I had to modify the Welcome to Waddle Bay sign a little bit, but that's okay. I also saw in another video by Sparrow838, so again, name dropping again, where she used these faux branches and trees to frame her viewing point, and I really love the way it turned out. And I wanted to emulate that here and give it a little bit more personality. So I tried my best. I don't know how it looked. I think it adds a little bit more uniqueness to this overall build, and rotating the pieces around, it's surprising how versatile they can be. The last time I actually used these pieces was in our faux rock wall, so it's nice to see another use for them. I also added Waddle Bay to the front of our exhibit. So as our guests walk up those stairs, they're going to see some penguin posters with the name for their exhibit, and I think it's going to become an iconic visiting point for all of our guests. Also wanted to kind of create this entrance directing people down to our viewing area. So I utilized some more of these 2D letters to create an underwater viewing sign. Sadly, I wish there were some smaller pieces because I would have liked to have gone a little bit more unique with this underwater observation sign by maybe having it rotate sideways a little bit, put it on a tilt, but working with what we have here. Also decided to add in this little arrow as well, which kind of pushed it over to them, and I think it worked out really well. I'm quite happy with how this ended up looking. Had to rotate some things around, but I made it work. Our last change that needed to be made was including some foliage for our guests. I tried to limit the use of the grass here to kind of keep it more attention on the rock work and the water features. As such, I placed a few bushes and some grass and really just called it a day after that. Now, I did use more of our path curbs made from those rock pillars. Sadly, I can't change the color, so we have a bit of the break in the overall build, but I think it's a small price to pay to really bring this entire area together. Finally, it was time to begin work on our actual habitat. Now, I placed a lot of faux rock walls around the outdoor habitat area. We staggered them, kind of gave that more of an idea of a cliff. We also used planks to cover up a portion of the concrete walls. Now, that being said, we go back and change this. It was very off-putting seeing this. We ended up using more of those faux rock cladding pieces to mask the concrete instead. As mentioned, we need to have a lot of these rocks set up. Penguins naturally live on the coast, and we wanted to kind of emulate that as much as possible. Now, I did make sure to leave a space open, and I used the archway to kind of mask this, and this allows the penguins to travel from outdoor to indoor. Now, the idea behind having our indoor backstage area, and this is going to really be where our penguins go to rest at night. This is going to be where they're nesting. It's going to be a safe environment for them. And truthfully, from a conservation perspective, it allows us to continue to do more studies with them, work with our penguins, and make sure they're being taken care of. I use more of the faux rocks to mask the concrete pad that we've made with our water feature, and then staggered some additional faux rocks to kind of give it an idea that penguins could essentially hop down in there. The reason why is because unfortunately, the way the terraforming occurred, the water doesn't quite hit the edge, and I didn't want to bring it up any further than it already was, so we're going to make do with what we have. Now, I did add in some unique trees this time, more green, to kind of give it a little bit more life and a better feel. There's a lot of gray here, and the best way to break that up would be to utilize those trees. Now, this is where that faux rock wall comes in. Really wanted to cover a lot of those planks. Now, I did leave it here, and the reason why is because it does help to kind of contrast the colors a little bit. It helps to hide concrete and mixes quite well. Now, I did place a few rock pieces in the center of the build. This just helps like break up the sand, cover that up a little bit more. And then I did some additional adding with these smaller rock cladding pieces to cover any open areas. Once this was completed, I added some more king penguin posters around the edge. This kind of gives it, again, the idea that it is a penguin exhibit, adds some more white to it. Unfortunately, despite what we may believe, penguins don't always live in the snow, and I think that this kind of really helped to add into it. Finally, it was time for us to work on the interior aspect of our build, the backstage area. Initially, I wanted to have the idea that we'd have this airlock where penguins would march through and then they would work in. I ended up changing my plan on this and utilizing just one flat open area. Initially, I had the idea of placing just a few rock pieces inside in the habitat and layering the ground with more rock painting. In hindsight, didn't really make sense. This is actually an interior building, so I did change directions and instead went with a full cement floor and utilized these plaster pieces to kind of create a framework for our habitat door. Now, the really cool thing with this is, once again, because they're so large, it actually helps to mask a lot of the area and gives the door a nice frame to work with. Now, I utilized a lot of the larger mesh fence pieces. This helped to kind of create the idea that we don't want the penguins to leave. It's very secure, but it kind of allows us to once again look in and observe. Quite happy how I was able to get this to match, and it turned out really well. The last aspect of an interior area, besides bedding and whatnot, is to kind of have this underwater swimming area for them to utilize. Now, the reality is it's not deep enough for them to swim. We would have to be somewhere close to about 2.5 meters for this, but I think it does the work in giving them semblance of the ability to go swimming while they're indoors. Now, keeping within the theme that everything inside is going to be covered in concrete because it is an indoor building, I also covered the hole that we've created for the swimming area with concrete as well. I did end up raising the overall terraformed area, and the reason why is I didn't necessarily want the penguins to maybe clip through the bottom if they were to go swimming in here. I also utilized more of these faux rock steps. This allows our penguins to march their way down, and I'm actually quite happy with how it works. Admittedly, the paths are a little crooked though. I also really wanted to recreate that natural breeding grounds for our penguins. Now, we know that they don't actually use nests, but rather burrows and crooks and crannies from the rocks, but I still felt that this added a fun little addition to the area. To kind of give it that nest feel, we actually ended up utilizing these rope coil pieces and then placed some eggs on top of that to kind of give it that nest-like look. Of course, this also works within our core mandate of conservation and repopulation that Conservation Canada has and is trying to follow. Now, to help complete the backstage area, I really wanted to use some more of our conservation pieces to give it a more realistic feel and fill in that empty space. I also ended up grabbing the pieces from our aardvark exhibit to hang onto the walls. I like the way they look, and honestly, I figured we could reuse them again. Now, we are approaching the end of the build, And I'm finding that these larger exhibits are taking a lot more time to build up. And that actually makes sense. As we improve and find new ways to build and make better things, they naturally take longer. In fact, this particular build, this version, took about 5 hours to make, and that's not including the 2 hours that I spent on making one version and then tearing it all down. Now, is it perfect? By no means, but I feel it's a step in the right direction. And for our first penguin exhibit, I'm super happy with how it turns out. Of course, we also had to finish off a few small minor details. We added our new custom black roof to the backstage area, and honestly, I really love how this kind of came together. A second story that in real life might contain our keeper's hut or act as an office or another observation point for the exhibit itself. Now, we did fence in the area as well, and while it's not as large as the other fenced in area, I think it still fits in quite well, and we filled up a lot of that empty space with a new air conditioner unit to help maintain some healthy temperatures. Now, to ensure that we had a good air conditioner unit, I did steal the one that we had with our gift shop. Now, of course, we did have to make a few minor adjustments, and that's okay. There is one thing of note is that the poles that we utilize on the air conditioner didn't quite fit, so they do stick into the exhibit just a tad. Now for the filtration towers, I added these vents on the bottom and then mixed in some bubbles to give it a feel that it's actually, intaking a lot of the water and filtrating it out. Now to complete the entire idea that we're intaking and cleaning our water, I also added some additional vent pieces on the floor, and this would act as our bottom vents. This would once again pull water in and then filtrate it out. Lastly, I added some coolers onto the filtration towers. As we don't necessarily have actual pipes, this is a great way to kind of mask that. And on top of that, with our animation, with some smoke kind of coming out, it actually works really well to give it that idea that maybe it is pushing water back into the exhibit. Now for the foliage in the water area, I added in some ground cover as well as some pine trees to give it a better feel as debris in the water. This also helped to give the viewing point something more to look at than just concrete. Now speaking of the observation point, I really wanted to add in a custom floor to hide the path mess that I made earlier. I used a plaster piece as the base and then added some arbor pieces in the center to give it a more textured, unique feel. Now I did adjust the color a bit as well to make it a truly one-of-a-kind wood floor. We also made a new sunshade for our guests using some new conservation pieces and a sunshade cloth. You're going to see that in just a few seconds. Now I am going to end the commentary here as we are at the end of the speed build, but stick around as well because I want to really show you that before and after shot as well as a short tour of our new exhibit. Once again, I'm also really happy with how this turned out and I'm excited to work on this new area of Oasis Zoo. Now, I did see quite a few comments on some additional animals that you guys would like to see added into the zoo, and I'm definitely taking that feedback away for our next speed build. So make sure to check in on that. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the end of the speed build. Now, as we approach the end of the build, I am going to throw up a before and after shot of this area. I think it goes to show how much we've accomplished and how much we changed. We're also going to have a tour. The tour is going to be done live in game, so bear with me for any audio problems. Now, as mentioned in the before and after photo, what better way to end the video than with a tour of our newest addition, Waddle Bay. I'm really happy with how this definitely turned out. I actually love the contrast between the metal and the wood. I think it really fits, and who would have thought that I would have gotten the inspiration from a McDonald's of all places. As we kind of wrap around the corner, we're going to go to our underwater viewing. We're going to talk about that in just 2 seconds. I'm really happy with this water feature as well. This natural waterfall that's kind of fed and filtered by our filtration system for the entire exhibit. Now, for those eagle-eyed viewers out there, I definitely made a spelling mistake. I originally called this underwater observation. Really wasn't the right name for it. Had a spelling mistake actually, so I ended up changing this out to underwater viewing. Could not fit the full observation word in there. Now, as we kind of go down, we're going to see our restroom with the faux rock walls and our custom flooring. Now, there is a little bit of flickering happening, and I think that's just going to be it's going to be something we have to deal with. Now, as we kind of come up and take a look in our water viewing area, sadly, we don't have any penguins swimming around right now, but there are a few things to kind of call out. Of course, we have our filtration systems. You can see the vents with the bubbles. They actually work really well. Our cooling pipes that, with their added benefit of the steam kind of flowing out, makes it look really nice. Now, we do have our vents in the floor. The bubbles I use for this one, not the greatest. I think they're kind of a little jarring, so we might have to go back and take a look at that. But overall, it looks quite nice. I actually enjoy the foliage that we kind of put down here. Those pine trees really kind of make it feel a little bit more lived in and a little bit more realistic. I'm quite happy with this. Of course, as we leave, how can we forget how we have custom rock benches where guests can sit down on these benches and, it's going to look like they're sitting on the rocks. I'm really excited to see how that kind of turns out for us. Now, as we leave the underwater viewing area, we wrap around, we're going to go take a look at the backstage area. Now, the reality is that we're never going to go to the backstage area. But in real zoos, you actually get to go on tours in the backstage area. And I find that this is one of the coolest features of going to a zoo, which is learning how, the zookeepers take care of everything. And as we kind of head back here, we're going to see the nesting area. Now, as mentioned, African penguins don't necessarily use these types of nests, and that's okay. But I think for what we wanted to kind of have from a feel, I think this really works out quite nice. I'm very happy with how it looks. Now, as we leave, I think it's time for us to swing around and take a look at the front area. We're going to speed up things a little bit. We're going to take a little quick jog around, just as we've already viewed this area. But I actually do want to say that from this perspective, being able to look back and see the rest of the zoo from a higher elevation is quite nice. You can actually see our spice market sticking out in the distance behind the sand dunes as well, which is really awesome. Now, as we come up to the above water viewing area, I'm quite happy with how these sunshades actually look. Despite my initial, concerns, I think this overall build looked really nice, and utilizing these conservation pieces, this latest work, kind of adds an extra little bit of flair to it. Now, as we look in, we can actually see our penguins. We actually have a few that are swimming. There's one that's swimming, and we have quite a few in the background as well. Of course, they have that iconic waddle, which everybody loves about penguins. I'm really happy with how the back wall actually looks as well. Now, admittedly, there is one thing that's missing, and I don't know what happened to it, but we originally had a door. We're going to have to go in and fix that door and put it back in place. But overall, it looks really nice, and I'm really happy with the end product here. Now, as we were to leave the penguin area, we can kind of wrap around the edges here. I did add some additional foliage and rock work to kind of marry this together with the next exhibit that we're going to build. And speaking of the next exhibit, I definitely heard the feedback about, getting in some additional animals. And one of the things that I heard was really a giraffe and zebra hybrid exhibit. And I think this is going to be the perfect area for that. I've already laid out some pathing for this as well. And, my hope is to kind of build an indoor viewing area, their shelter way over in the distance, and then have some of their more generic, outdoor exhibit areas here. So I'm really excited to start working on this. Now, before we get there, though, our next episode is going to be a little bit of a different one. As many of you might know, we actually had a challenge in our Discord, and we have quite a few submissions, and we're going to be doing a tour of all the submissions. So that's going to come out next week, and I'm really excited for that. As always, I just want to say thank you very much for all the support that everybody's provided. It's really helped me, and I appreciate that. And of course, I just want to say one last thing. Ciao for now, everybody.